So this week we will be beginning our discussion of the novella Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, written by Stephen King, and it's included in the short story collection Different Seasons. It's also available online. I'm also highly recommending that you watch the film version as well. There's a film that was released, I think, in 1992, The Shawshank Redemption, and it's a really good adaptation of the novella, and it's one of my favorite movies as well. So I think it's rare to get a film version of a piece of literature that, does justice to the original text, but I think this one actually is, as good, if not better, than the novella. So that's saying a lot. So again, if you have the opportunity to watch the film in addition to reading the novella in Different Seasons, do so. So the author that we're studying this week is Stephen King, and I'm sure you've all have heard of Stephen King. He's one of the most sort of well-known, commercially successful authors out there. And he's published over 50 novels, 200 short stories, and again, a lot of his work has been sort of adapted into films or miniseries. If you haven't read Stephen King, again, it's very readable, and I think everybody has a favorite Stephen King movie or text. Some of the titles you're probably familiar with would be Carrie, The Shining, Running Man, Cujo, Pet Sematary, Misery, The Green Mile. These are all Stephen King stories. He's probably most well known for his horror writing, but Shawshank Redemption is sort of a departure for him. It's not a horror story, so he's dealing with subject matter that is sort of different than what he's normally used to writing. So while Stephen King is most often known for writing horror literature, he does have themes that sort of transcend just, being scary text. There are sort of universal themes that run throughout his narratives. The one that we're sort of going to focus on in our reading of Shawshank Redemption is this idea of overcoming or challenging corruption and understanding sort of innocence as it relates to the good of people. So you could sort of break down, even horror literature as sort of a text of good versus evil. And here in Shawshank Redemption, evil is sort of associated with corruption and the power structure of the prison system. So corruption and violence and sort of the hypocrisy of the administrators of Shawshank Prison. And this is contrasted with a sort of innate goodness in characters like Andy Dufresne and Red, who have sort of a sense of hope and goodness. They're sort of devoted to redemption and redeeming themselves. So there are some universal themes that sort of go beyond and sort of are a thread that tie together all of Stephen King's works. The one that I sort of view as sort of central to his writing is just the basic good versus evil kind of theme. And in Shawshank Redemption, we see evil being sort of embodied by the administration of the prison system. So men who are in charge of the prison are corrupt, and they are sort of practice a sort of hypocrisy in their judgment of and treatment of their prisoners. And it's sort of ironic in the fact that, these there are prisoners who have committed crimes, but the justice system is also corrupt. So there is sort of a skewed sense of right and wrong in the story. And the character that embodies goodness or innocence in sort of most strongly is, of course, our protagonist, Andy Dufresne. And he is an innocent man who was sent to prison. And his traits, so we will discuss this in sort of more depth, but he sort of embodies an inner strength, an inner sense of goodness that he sort of engenders in other people as well. So he allows others to sort of grow and develop and transform through his influence. So he spreads goodness and a sort of positive inner strength to other prisoners, whereas the prison officials are corrupt and they abuse their power, and they sort of spread violence and commit evil acts. So there is a sort of sense of skewed justice in the Shawshank prison, and this is sort of one of the themes or ideas that we'll be discussing in this novella. So as I was mentioning, Stephen King is probably most well known for his horror writing. He writes in the genre of horror most often in his films like Cujo or Carrie. Um, he's written sort of, traditional horror stories with ghosts and vampires and the supernatural. His influences are H.P. Lovecraft, and he was greatly influenced by sort of comics and Alfred Hitchcock films. So he's coming from the genre of horror literature, and in that genre we do see ideas of good versus evil. And in Shawshank we have a departure from that uh, sense of supernatural horror. We're still dealing with sort of ideas of fear and the presence of evil, but it is more on a sort of human level, right? So we're not dealing with the supernatural, we're dealing with the capacity of any individual to be either good or evil, to do, to have the potential for both of those, but then to make the choices whether to uh, be a force of good or be a force of evil. And in Shawshank Redemption, it's more of a sort of universal story, right? Where we're dealing with prisoners, like on the literal level. This is a story about prisoners, but I think the themes and ideas being presented in this story are much more universal, and we can relate with the prisoners on a level that just doesn't have to do with what their crimes were and how they gain a sense of redemption. These are universal struggles that are being sort of presented in this text. And I think this is why Shawshank Redemption is, one of the favorite films or favorite texts of so many people, because these are themes and ideas that are so universal. So at the basic idea, we have a narrative that depicts a single person or an individual's triumph over adversity. So both Andy and Red have to sort of face adversity in many different forms, whether physical violence or psychologically destructive environments, but they are sort of beaten down, and it's sort of how they are able to overcome these struggles and fight for their own sort of sense of their will to survive, I guess, and overcome some of these obstacles in life to attain freedom. So inner strength and this idea of hope will become sort of the motivating factors, the sort of intrinsic or internal motivation of characters like Andy Dufresne, who is faced with, again, physical, emotional, psychological obstacles that he must overcome in order to attain his dreams of freedom. And we also have the basic tension between good versus evil, where again, evil is embodied in the powers that be within the prison system. So the corrupt administrators, the warden, the head of the guards, and the prison system as a whole, which is really based on sort of corruption and hypocrisy. And it's sort of ironic that goodness, innocence, hope, all these positive traits in humanity are actually found within the prisoners themselves. So it's a commentary also on, I think, our prison systems and the ideas of punishment and hypocrisy in society in general. So I do recommend watching the film adaptation, and the film was written and directed by Frank Darabont, and he works really closely with Stephen King to do the adaptation. But there are certain differences that exist between the novella and the film version. For instance, in the novel, Red is characterized as a middle-aged Irish man with graying red hair, and in a departure, Frank Darabont cast Morgan Freeman, who is an African American actor, to play Red. And this sort of adds another level of sort of, I guess, social commentary in the film version. And it's an interesting sort of twist on the narrative. Tommy Williams also has a sort of different fate, so his fate in the novel versus the film are different. I won't give you a spoiler at this point, but he has a different trajectory in the film. And then Brooks Hatlin has a more significant role in the film, and I really liked how the film sort of emphasized this character of Brooks Hatlin, as he sort of seems to embody this theme of institutionalization that we'll talk about in the text. But the film really does a great job of sort of expanding upon this character of Brooks Hatlin, and it offers sort of more depth into this phenomenon of how the prisoners become institutionalized and sort of embed kind of, or end up sort of losing a part of their spirit, their inner strength through the prison system itself. And then the warden, there's many wardens in the novel, but in the film it sort of centralizes all those wardens into one figure, Warden Norton, and he's brought to justice in a different way in the film. And it seems to be much more satisfying in a way in the film version. And then the conclusion of the film and the narrative are slightly different as well. The novel has an ending that's slightly open-ended, whereas the film is more conclusive and ties together the narrative more sort of in a happy ending. So both, I think, are very, worth your time reading the novella first and then watching the film. I would definitely make time to do both of those things when we're studying this story. So the main characters in the novel, Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption, our narrator is Red, and he's telling us a story about his friend Andy Dufresne, who's also a prisoner. There's also sort of antagonists like Boggs Diamond and the sisters, who are responsible for some of the most brutal violence in the text. Then we have characters Brooks Hatlin, Tommy Williams, Normaden, who is not in the film version, he's only in the novel, and Elwood Blatch. As far as the prison staff goes, there are 3 different wardens depicted in the novel: George Dunahee, Greg Stamus, and Samuel Norton, and they're all sort of present different versions of corruption or hypocrisy. And then there's Byron Hadley, who is the head of the guards, who is also responsible for a lot of the violence in the film. And I do have to warn you, just if you are going to watch the film, there is, explicit violence and subject matter that is potentially, harmful or or disturbing. It's, subject matter for a mature